member on permanent roles in the Department of English at the University of Hyderabad. Sir is an ardent researcher and continues to publish his research papers and books in various areas of his interest, which includes American literature, popular culture, Indian writing in English, and ENT. Today, Dr. Alapati is with us to give a talk on publication ethics, patent copyrights, and plagiarism. Good afternoon, sir. We are all happy that you are here to grace us with your talk. And over to you, sir. Please start the session, sir.
One small announcement. Dear participants, please switch on your video so that we can take a screenshot before the starting of the session. Thank you, sir. Over to you, sir.
As many as possible, please. Excuse me, please. Okay, sir. We shall start the session, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being so honest. Wonderful introduction. So, at the outset, I would like to thank the management of Raghu College of Engineering for making me a part of this 5-day virtual FDP on research methodology. I thank the convener, Dr. Anindita Chatterjee, program coordinator, Ms. P. Revati, and the head of the Department of English, Dr. Banu Kumari Garu, part of this 5-day virtual FTP. I'm given an interesting topic which is quite relevant in today's world, which is on publication ethics, patent, copyright, and plagiarism. So I will start off, my talk will be for about an hour, followed by question and answer session, and that is how I plan to continue my presentation. So as of now, I will minimize my presence, and then I will switch on the PPT so that I can go ahead with my presentation.
Yes, sir.
Just one moment, I'm just getting this thing adjusted.
Okay, sir.
So in the is it visible, ma'am?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's visible, sir.
So, in the 21st century, we have seen several changes that have taken place in the 21st century, particularly in the LPG scenario, liberalization, privatization, and globalization scenario, wherein everything is continuing. The internet has started dominating the world. At the same time, it has been making the world a smaller place because we are able to have access to information within seconds. In this context, or in this background, if we look at the present topic, which is publication ethics, patent, copyright, and plagiarism, we find that this is more than relevant. There was a time, if you look at the history of the world, probably until the 20th century and the mid 20th century in particular, 1939 to 1945, World War II took place. And after 1945, the world had started, or rather, decolonization had begun, and several countries won back their freedom, won back their independence, including India in 1947. All of us know this. But then, how is it all related to our current talk? The way it is related is that since those times, we have been moving into a world where there is a lot of technological advancements, scientific advancements that have been taking place across the globe. Until that time, even today, undoubtedly, even today, there are certain pockets on the planet where there are serious problems. However, it is information transmission that has been dominating the world. On one side, we know that 1913 to 1945 was World War II, and the atomic bomb was bombed on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. And all of us know that the Japanese were reluctant to give up, and the Americans didn't have a choice, but they had to bomb these cities to destroy the Japanese. All of us know this. So if we look at there is a lot of scientific technological progress which had taken place. But what about this technology reaching developing continents like Asia and Africa? Though Russia, then USSR forms a part of Europe and Asia, but still there have been several challenges in the world over. Again, there is this information decimation which has been taking place. For most of the time, we from India have been looking up towards the West and America for knowledge, seeking of knowledge, or knowledge accumulation. But things have started changing ever since the last part of the 20th century, and probably in particular the last quarter of the 20th century. Again, for the audience, just to make it very clear, 20th century begins like 1901 to 2000. And 21st century obviously began in the first part of, began in the year 2001, and it will continue on until 2100. And we have been seeing rapid technological changes and all kinds of advancements since 2000 and 2001 in particular, and then the first quarter of the 21st century. We are in the first quarter of the 21st century, and there is so much of the world is truly turning global. Against this background, friends, I would like to discuss the topic that has been that have been assigned to me.
Sir,
Looking at the,
sir,
ma'am,
the screen is not visible, sir. Just now. Till now it is visible. It is now visible.
okay, maybe okay, maybe I have to.
Okay.
It says only meeting organizers and presenters can share. Can you also give me access, ma'am? Fixed number of years to print, publish, perform, film, or record literary, artistic, or musical material. And the last word, plagiarism. It refers to the practice of taking someone else's work or ideas and passing them off. So now let us look into in slide 3. Next slide. Publication ethics. If you look at the phrase publication ethics, I had already explained that it speaks about standards which aim to promote honesty, transparency, and accountability among authors, editors, reviewers, publishers, and readers. If you look at the word ethics, it often is referred to as the moral principles that govern human behavior, and they form the foundation endeavors. In the realm of research, ethics play a pivotal role in shaping the integrity, credibility, and impact of scholarly pursuits. Ethics in research encompass a set of principles and guidelines that researchers must adhere to in order to ensure the welfare of Here I would like to give a small example. If you look at ancient India, the ancient Bharat, we know, is one of the oldest civilizations on this planet. However, because of innumerable invasions that have taken place on this land, it so happened that most of our literature, most of our scientific progress, most of our knowledge, data or information that was preserved had been destroyed. Because whenever invaders had come onto this land, the first thing they did was they would destroy libraries, they would destroy those places where literature was stored. In other words, we can assume that the foreign invaders never had a tolerance to accept or even protect the native. Assume that even that was unethical. So ethics means, on one side, it speaks of the morals. It speaks about how important it is for people to preserve their own rich traditions. And very few countries, particularly Europe, most successful in retaining its own ancient knowledge base. Now, the next point is safeguarding human rights. Perhaps the most compelling reason for the emphasis on ethics is in research relies on its capacity to safeguard the fundamental human rights of research participants. In the pursuit of knowledge, researchers engage with individuals from diverse backgrounds, often seeking their participation in experiments or studies. Ethics mandates that research retain informed consent from participants, ensuring that they fully understand the purpose, potential risks, and benefits of the research. This not only upholds the principle of autonomy, but also protects individuals from undue harm or coercion. Moreover, ethics dictate that researchers respect the privacy and confidentiality of participants, thereby preserving their dignity and well-being. Here I can also quote two examples. One best example all of us had seen was during the COVID period. During 2020, last part of 19 and the first part of, or maybe the first part of the 2020, when COVID started penetrating into the world, there were a lot of experiments which were conducted on several people who were volunteers. So in such a scenario, they were completely educated about the effects of administering these drugs. So this also focuses on their consent, their knowledge to everything. So there should be no mischief involved in the company which tests and the volunteers who take part in this. Similarly, when it comes to research, for example, as language teachers, we also carry out research. Teachers and students participate. Even here, there should be honesty both on the part of the researcher and the part of students and teachers who became a part of this research by being honest and clear about everything. Moving on to maintaining data integrity. Ethics in research extends beyond the realm of participating rights and extends to the integrity of data. Honesty, transparency, and accuracy are critical components of ethical research, and researchers are bound by ethical standards to accurately represent their findings, regardless of whether they align with their initial hypothesis. Falsification, fabrication, or selective reporting of data not only undermines the credibility of the research, but also erodes public trust in scientific endeavors. I think this is again something extremely important, because integrity of data is only when there is integrity, only when integrity is maintained in terms of data collection, data dissemination, data analysis, the results will also be useful. Let us say if we have data which is false, fabricated, and if we use this data, this fabricated data on people or for circulation, what usually happens is that the results will go wrong. This is the reason we have several agencies which conduct research. Let's assume that in 2024 elections are coming out, so there are a lot of agencies uh, who conduct maybe survey across several states and several parts of the country. When they conduct, there are few which are fake and which are fabricated. There are few others which reach out to various pockets like urban, rural, semi-urban, semi-rural, etc. And based on the data, based on various sampling methods that they follow, they come out. This gives out some kind of a result when it comes to electioneering. But there are also certain other things. For example, let us say an English teacher is doing research on the impact of maybe critical students, and if this data is fabricated, results will be out, everything will be out, but there will be no integrity that will be found in this particular data because it is fabricated. And it is in this context that several universities, several institutes of higher education are emphasizing on the need for data integrity. As we move on, fostering trust in public perception, the relationship between ethics and public trust is symbiotic, which means both are mutually mutually interrelated and of mutual need. Ethical research practices engender trust among participants, collaborators, and the broader public. When individuals perceive that their rights are and well-being are prioritized, they are most likely to participate in research endeavors, leading to a more robust and diverse pool of data. A transparent and ethical approach to research serves as a bridge between the scientific community and the public, fostering a sense of shared responsibility and collaboration. Research is not merely a set of bureaucratic regulations, it is profound commitment to advancing knowledge responsibly. As researchers delve into uncharted territories and explore complex questions, they must be mindful of the potential consequences of their work. Ethical considerations prompt researchers to anticipate and mitigate potential harms, promoting the ethical use of emerging technologies and innovative methodologies. By adhering to ethical principles, researchers ensure that their work contributes positively to the betterment of society rather than inadvertently causing harm. So, as I told you, like, if again going back to my example of World War II, I don't want to speak about World War I because that was more towards the first part of the 20th century, and the 20th century we know has been a happening century in world history. Maybe the colonization invasions had reached its peak in the 20th century, and the second half of the 20th century was involved in a lot of freedom movements, and rather probably we can all assume that the World War II had destroyed every powerful nation on planet Earth, and it was because of which freedom was granted or to most countries, and most European nations which were ruling had to go back to their homes to look after their own things. And we find that knowledge, if we closely understand, if we closely watch, or if we closely try to, if we are a follower of newspapers or even news, we begin to understand that there is a generation which were digital immigrants. Like I grew up back in school without learning much about computers. But once I entered my job, I had to learn computers. I had to get access to. So I started off as a digital nobody, but then I became a digital immigrant. But we find people born in 90s, 2000s, or last part of the 20th century, last decade of the 20th century, and first part of the 21st century. Most of them grow with technology. They have access to technology, and we are forced to upgrade and update our knowledge base in terms of technological awareness. And here, most important thing is that one gets a lot of information on a lot of things, but we must be extremely cautious and careful in only using that knowledge so that it will help us and also help our future generations for better research and better life. Ma'am, next slide. So the patent trace. The patent trace is in fact the second point, as I told you. It's a small story. It's a story about two individuals. In the early 20th century, two inventors, so one is X and the other is Y, embarked on a race to patent a groundbreaking technology that would revolutionize communication. Both worked in separate laboratories, and each had stumbled upon similar ideas for transmitting radio signals. Complete their prototypes, they were unaware that the first one to file a patent application would likely secure exclusive rights to the technology. X managed to file his patent a few days ahead of Y. Ultimately, X's patent was granted and he reaped the benefits of his invention's commercial success. This story highlights the importance of timing in patent application and in the competitive nature of innovation. Yes, because when you patent it, which means that it is your own invention, and an own invention which is recorded. Unfortunately, for a very long time, people had been copying something of technology of other, maybe copying intellectual property, some inventions, all have been copied and they had been used and reused. But in the 21st century, which is a more visible century and a visible society, we find that it is extremely difficult because people are patenting their innovations, their ideas, and their research findings. It has come to me as a surprise that it is not only in the field of sciences that patents are taking place, but it is also in terms of humanities, even in humanities and social sciences too, certain patents are taking place. But the most popular are obviously in the field of science and technology in particular. Maybe some of the famous patent fights that we see are between Apple and Samsung, Apple versus Samsung, Microsoft versus Apple, Meta versus Twitter. It is all because of the rat race for recognition, and obviously it all boils down to money making. It all boils down to how much profit can somebody make. So now let us look at the next point, which is history of patents. So if you look at the history of patents, it dates back to centuries and has evolved significantly over time. And I'll just provide you a brief overview of the key milestones in the history of patents. If you look at ancient civilization, the concept of granting exclusive rights to inventors can be traced back to ancient civilizations. In ancient Greece, for example, inventors were occasionally granted temporary monopolies for their innovations. Similarly, in ancient Rome, individuals could obtain exclusive rights to certain inventions for a limited period. Here, I would like to also mention that I could not retrieve much information related to what happened in ancient India. But I think under the Indian Knowledge Systems initiative taken up by the Ministry of Education of Government of India, people are trying to do research on even the ancient patents and the ancient aspects related to India, so that it could also be digitized and it could also be used for research and other advancement purposes. This is the reason I have only the European accounts of earliest history of is with me. Next is medieval guilds and monopolies. So medieval guilds, in fact, if you look at the word guilds, it refers to an association of craftsmen or merchants, and they held over certain things. Like during the medieval period, guilds in Europe controlled trade and craftsmen. Some guilds offered protection to their members' innovative ideas by granting them exclusive rights within the guild. Additionally, monarchs monopolies to individuals for specific products or processes, encouraging innovation in exchange for exclusive rights. Next comes the Venetian Patent Statute. As all of you know, Venetia refers to Venice. One of the earliest recorded examples of patent system was established in Venice in 1474, that is the 15th century. The Venetian Patent Statute granted inventors a 10-year exclusive right to produce their inventions, aiming to encourage new technologies and attract skilled artisans to the city. Next, Statute of Monopolies. Statute, as all of you know, is a written law which took place in the 17th century, that is 1623. In England, The Statute of Monopolies was enacted in 1623. This statute limited the granting of exclusive rights to inventions and innovations, aiming to prevent abuses of monopolies. However, certain exceptions were made, such as for new manufacturing processes. Invention and modern patents. The Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th century brought about advancements. Governments began to recognize the importance of encouraging innovation through patents. The concept of a limited time monopoly in exchange for disclosing the invention's details gained traction. Again, here I'm reminded of something very unfortunate. Like, the unfortunate thing is about the slavery, the rampant slavery that has spread into the United States and several countries dominated by the British and other Europeans. In particular, you know, the kind of an blacks were taken into America as slaves. All of us know this history, and to America and various parts of Europe. Similarly, Indians were also taken as slaves even into places like South Africa and certain other African countries to work in cotton fields, to work in certain factories as workers. And they wanted free, cheap labor, for which during the industrial revolution, a lot of bloodshed, lot of inhuman treatment was meted out to people from the undeveloped nations. Governments, then let's move on to the first US patent law, which took place in the 18th century, that is 1790, the last part of the 18th century. The United States passed its first patent law in 1790. Here, all of you most of you may find it quite surprising, as I told you, because it is only the European people from and the Americans who had mostly availed all these facilities, and other developing continents, maybe like people where there was Europeans like India, Africa, these countries had a lot of problems. On one side, this is technology. On the other side, there are social lives of people. So if we look at the history of social lives of people, it is much more with blood and pain. So in the US, let us see what happened. The United States passed its first patent law in 1790. The law allowed inventors to obtain patents for their inventions, which were granted by the Secretary of State. The term of protection was 14 years, renewable for an additional 7 years if the inventor could prove the invention was useful and important. Paris Convention for the Protection of Industrial Property and TRIPS Agreement in 1995 and modern patent system. So these were also some of the other innovations that have taken place, but I'll move on to modern patent system, which took place which are relevant today in the 21st century. Today, patent system exists in most countries, offering inventors exclusive rights to their innovations for a period in exchange for disclosing their inventions to the public. Patents cover a wide range of fields, from technology and pharmaceuticals to utility. The history of patents reflects the evolution of society's attitudes towards innovation and the role of intellectual property in fostering technological progress. And most of us know that these days, most colleges, most universities and institutes of higher learning, even in India, are filing patents for their inventions and for their research outputs, which are unique and which they believe should be protected as intellectual property rights. That is the reason they are protected and safeguarded. Now let us move to the next slide. The copyright clash. This is again another story. It speaks of two authors, Alex and James, had successful collaboration on a series of novels. After completing the first 3 books, tensions arose when they disagreed about the direction of. Alex wanted to take the story in a darker direction, while James preferred a more light-hearted approach. They decided to part ways and each pursued their vision independently. However, they both had claims to characters, setting, and plot elements legal battles ensued over the rights to the series intellectual property, involving discussions about copyright ownership and creative contributions. This story highlights the complex ownership and collaborations breakdown. Yes, we find this, in the world today. Next slide, please. There
Sorry.
have been cases wherein, yes, ma'am, history of copyrights. Yes, there
Yes,
will be,
yes.
and there have been cases of clash and cases of differences between partners, and this is when there had been, and there are still cases, several lawsuits failed in India and abroad, in several countries abroad, wherever the legal jurisdiction stretches to. These cases are filed because of the differences that have been taking place. So let's look at the history of copyrights. The history of copyrights is a fascinating journey that spans centuries and has adapted to changing technological, social, and legal landscapes. And here is a brief overview of the key copyright. If you look at the early developments, the concept of copyright can be traced back to ancient civilizations like the Greek and Rome, where creators were granted certain protection for their artistic and literary works. In the 15th century, the invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg led to an increased need to protect authors' work from unauthorized copying. Here, I would also like to give another example. If you look at, I'm sure most of you must be remembering this, that at one point, I think it was the United States, I suppose, someone in the United States wanted to patent yoga. And Indians vehemently opposed that, stating that it was from India, and they started with books from uh, popular books on Patanjali's yoga, stating that this is from India, and there was a lot of debate, discussion, and finally, I think this gentleman from the US, or this team from the US, went back that they cannot copyright or patent this particular thing. So moving on, the Statute of Anne. If you look at the Statute of Anne, and here maybe I think in the first part, as I told you, in the early developments in the 15th century, the invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg, who is a German, led to the increased need to protect authors' work from unauthorized copying. And here again, printing press was introduced to England by William Caxton. And it is because of this reason, they say that world history is British history, because statement in amongst students of literature that world history is British literature, because most of the narratives were created by the British. And since they had access to the printing press, they were able to print their own opinions on something, their opinions about Asians, their opinions about Indians, their opinions about Hinduism, their opinions about Islam, their opinions about Christianity. So they would, in fact, develop these narratives, or create this, more than developing, they would create these narratives in such a way that if they want to highlight something, they would highlight it. If they want to defame something, they would defame it. And most of these have been whoever has the first printing press, like they say, like as kids, most of us grew up reading this, Columbus discovered America, but only in the first part of the 20th century that people are negating it strongly, and no longer are there such statements made, because they were Native Americans living on the American continent, and these natives were killed. Most of them were butchered, killed, poisoned, and their lands were taken away by the white invading Europeans, and that is the history of America. All of us know this. Again, it all boils down to how the Europeans had started creating a system. The first Statute of Anne is the first modern copyright law, which took place in the first part of the 18th, that is 1710. The Statute of Anne was enacted by Great Britain in 1710. It granted authors the exclusive rights to print and publish their works for a limited time. This law marked a shift from a system granted by the Crown to a system where authors held rights. Next comes the US Copyright Act. When we look at the history of all these things, the patents, copyrights, or intellectual property rights, we find that all of these have their base in Europe and America. And if you look at the US Copyright Act of 1790, the United States passed its first copyright law in 1790, modeling after the Statute of Anne. It granted rights for 14 years with the option to renew for another 14 years if the author was still alive. Then came the Berne Convention, was established in 1886, aiming to provide international standards for copyright protection. And the convention introduced the principle of national treatment, where authors from member countries are granted the same protection as domestic authors. And India is a signatory of the Berne Convention. And then came the digital age challenges. The rise of digital technology, the internet, posed new challenges to copyright law. The case of copying and distributing digital content raised concerns about piracy and unauthorized sharing. Moving on, copyright term extension. Over the years, copyright terms have been extended multiple times in various countries due to lobbying from content industries. This has led to longer durations of copyright protection. Then came the Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998, which was enacted in the United States to address copyright issues in the digital environment. It introduced provisions for takedown notices to remove infringement online content. For your information, there have been several songs which have been copied from the US and other European nations by Indian musicians and they had a few of them have filed cases filed, and few of them have forgiven them, and they have disregarded such kind of copying by some of the, particularly musicians were involved in these kind of activities. Then came the WIPO Copyright Treaty, that is World Intellectual Property Organization. The WIPO Copyright Treaty and WIPO Performances Phonograms Treaty were adopted property organization to update and extend copyright protection to digital and online environments. Creative Commons licenses. This is what most researchers, most of our publications are in the CCL. Creative Commons introduced a set of licenses that allowed creators to choose the level of protection they want for their works, enabling a more flexible approach to copyright. Then came on the challenges of digital era, which has brought about debates over fair use, user-generated content, and the balance between copyright protection and the public domain. The ongoing tension between protecting the rights of creators and ensuring that creative works contribute to the enrichment of culture and knowledge. As technology continues to evolve, copyright laws continue to adapt new challenges and opportunities. Next slide, ma'am. Patents and copyrights. Here again, before we move on to this, I would also like to mention that there are several changes that have taken place in the recent past, which is about because of the AI, and governments across the world are thinking on how to frame laws for the artificial intelligence, especially tools like ChatGPT have dominated, and there are various versions of ChatGPT that have come about. Maybe the last part of the 20th century, maybe the last decade of the 20th century, people were using a lot of Google, and until very recently, Google was completely used. But today we find that AI is generating answers, is generating a lot of cues, generating a lot of insights on topics, and is doing all the job that is required of by maybe a couple of human beings, a couple of other intellectuals. If you look under this umbrella, patents and copyrights, in the realm of, I think we can go on to the next slide. Just to history of patents and copyrights in India. History of patents in India, which is like the pre-independent India, we find that India has rich tradition of indigenous knowledge and innovations, but formal patent protection was introduced by the British during the colonial rule. The first patent law, the Indian Patents and Designs Act, was enacted in 1856, and this law allowed inventions related to arts, manufacturers, and substances produced by manufacturers to be patented. As I mentioned, we were ruled by the British until 1947. So during this entire process, the British enacted laws for Indians, and in some cases there were laws for the intellectual class, or for the in terms of education, in terms of certain innovations to certain law. But all these were under the control of the British agency. During the post-independent era, after gaining independence, India continued to use patent laws inherited from the colonial era. However, there was growing debate about the balance between promoting innovation and safeguarding public interest. I think it will be, once again, I wish to mention that it is quite surprising to know and understand and realize that only in this part of the century have government started giving importance to indigenous knowledge from India. So wherever knowledge has been stored, wherever knowledge has been cornered or is in a very inactive mode, governments have begun to sponsor. And as I told you, the Indian knowledge system of the Ministry of Education is one such organization which is encouraging research in these areas. So the 1970s Patent Act, in response to concerns about the impact of strict patent protection on the access to medicines and technological development, India introduced the Patents Act of 1970. This act abolished patents for products already in the public domain, introduced process patent for food, drug, and chemicals, and aimed to prevent abuse of patent rights. And next comes the TRIPS Agreement of 1995, in which India joined the World Trade Organization and became subject to trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, or TRIPS agreement. As a result, India had to align its patent laws with TRIPS requirement. This was subsequently amended in 2005. To comply with TRIPS, India introduced significant amendments to its patent law. These changes expanded the scope of patentable subject matter, including pharmaceuticals. However, India also included provisions to ensure that patents did not impede access to medicines and allowed for compulsory licensing in certain situations. So if you look at the history of copyrights in India, Copyrights Act of 1914, this was the first copyright law in India and was introduced by the British colonial governments in 1914, and post-independent era in 1957, and there were subsequent amendments made in 1983, 84, and 1992. And later on, we moved on to the digital age, or the digital era, wherein amendments were also made. With the rise of digital technology and internet, India's Copyright Act was further amended in 2012 to address issues related to digital rights, technological protection measures, and online infringement. Fair use and public interest. India's Copyright Act provisions for fair dealing, which allow limited use of copyright material for purposes such as criticism, review, and education, contributing the balance between copyright protection and public interest. And both the history of patents and copyrights in India reflect the nation's effort to strike a balance between promoting innovation and creativity while safeguarding public welfare and access to knowledge. Ma'am, next. So the plagiarism predicament is another little story. In the academic world, Surya, a diligent student, spent weeks researching and writing his term paper on an obscure topic in history. Just before the submission deadline, he stumbled upon an article that sounded remarkably similar to his own work. Upon closer inspection, he realized that large portions of his paper had been copied verbatim, that is, word to word, phrase to phrase, without proper attribution. Surya was devastated by the discovery of plagiarism, as his hard work had been taken without permission. He reported the incident to his professor, who took appropriate action. This the importance of originality and integrity in academic writing. All of us know, in simple words, plagiarism is copying someone else's work as your own. And this is much more dangerous when it comes to written documents, because what happens is in under written documents, when you copy someone else's work as your own, it is documented. It amounts to cheating. It amounts to criminal intimidation too. And depending upon the gravity of the situation, depending upon the seriousness, and these laws are getting stricter now. But in the West, particularly in Europe and America, these laws have been very strong. And there are various tools like Turnitin and certain other plagiarism checker softwares, which are used to check if something is being plagiarized from some other source as your own. Next. So here I would provide an overview of plagiarism, patents, and copyrights in the Indian context. If you look at intellectual property rights, play a pivotal role fostering innovation, creativity, and the protection of original works. In the Indian context, a robust legal framework has been established to regulate and safeguard intellectual property rights, encompassing areas such as plagiarism, patents, and copyrights. So now we will try to understand how the law to plagiarism, patents, and copyrights in India, and we'll also try to understand how they help in creating a better, vibrant, knowledge-based economy. Plagiarism, as I had already mentioned, it authorized use of someone else's works, ideas, or expressions without proper attribution, and is a serious ethical and legal concern. While India doesn't have specific legislation solely dedicated to plagiarism, it is addressed through existing copyrights and intellectual property laws. The Indian Copyright Act of 1957 provides protection against unauthorized copying and use of original literary, artistic, musical, and dramatic works. Plagiarism falls within the realm of copyright infringement, infringers to legal consequences, including injunctions and monetary damages. Indian universities and academic institutions also enforce strict codes of conduct against plagiarism to maintain academic integrity. All of you know that has also the very less than, I think, about 10% of plagiarism is only accepted, like that too unintentional kind of plagiarism, unavoidable kind of maybe certain situations in PhD dissertations. Similarly, most research papers, particularly Scopus indexed papers or UGC care listed papers, are focusing on no plagiarism policy, plagiarism free policy. In other words, if your work is found to be plagiarized, even if it is self plagiarized, like you have copied or from your previous account or from your previous work, you're supposed to acknowledge that even. Moving on, the patents. The Indian Patents Act of 1970 governs the patent system in India, aiming to encourage innovation and protect invention. Grant inventors exclusive rights to their inventions, preventing others from making, using, selling, or importing the patented inventions without the inventor's consent. India's patent regime, for example, some of the things that you find the Copyright Act, when it comes to Copyright Acts or certain patents, we find that they even have the jurisdiction where they can be sold, where they can be used, etc. India's patent regime emphasizes public welfare and balances inventors' rights with broader societal interests. In 2005, India amended its patent laws to comply with international standards while retaining provisions for safe access to essential medicines. This was particularly relevant to provisions for safeguarding access to essential life-saving drugs. India's patent laws promote the disclosure of inventions for public benefit and foster research and development. Moving on, copyrights. The Indian Copyright Act of 1957 serves as the cornerstone of copyright protection in India. It covers a wide range of creative expressions, including literary, artistic, musical, and cinematographic works. Copyright grants creators exclusive rights to reproduce, distribute, adapt, and publicly perform their works. These rights enable creators to control the use of their creations and derive economic benefits from them. The Act also recognizes the rights of sound recordings and broadcasters. In recent years, the Act has been amended to align with digital advancements and international obligations, ensuring that copyright protection remains relevant in the digital era. Ma'am, next slide, ma'am. So there are a couple of works that I would like to prescribe and inform our audience, because I know that I had spoken at length on this topic on patents, copyright, and plagiarism. So there are a couple of books that I wish to our audience to know about. So the first one is my next slide. So as we understand, the intricate world of intellectual plagiarism, patents, and copyright is essential for understanding the protection and regulation of creative and innovative works. And to delve into these subjects comprehensively, I have which offers some invaluable insight into historical, legal, ethical, and practical aspects of intellectual property. The first one is The Little Book of Plagiarism by Richard Posner by Pantheon Books, as you can see. Apart from this, a lot of literature essays in the form of internet review material, which will help you to understand what constitutes plagiarism. Because there are people who have consciously, there are few others who have unconsciously or innocently or out of mistake got into plagiarism. Particularly we find students when they're asked to write or submit a project, mostly what they do is that they try to copy someone else's work or some information that is available somewhere, and they use it as their own material. And this constitutes seriousness, because it is unethical and it is unlawful too. This is in India, we are still being little liberal, but we are not at all liberal when it comes to academicians and people holding important positions getting into this thing. The next one, the other book other than this is Stolen Words, The Nazi Plunder of Jewish Books by Mark Glickman. And this book delves into the disturbing story of intellectual property theft during the Nazi regime. I hope we also get one such a book for the Indian, the intellectual property for Indians too, because our wealth had also been stolen. Our intellectual property had been plundered, had been bulldozed. And by exploring, this particular book focuses on how Nazis were systematically looted and culture. The book offers a chilling case on the consequences of unchecked plagiarism. Now moving on, next slide please. The book on patents, Patent It Yourself by David Pressman. As I had already mentioned, most of the books are where this has been mostly from the West. These days, more emphasis from the US. And this particular book focuses on, it acts as a practical guide to understand patents, and it offers step-by-step instructions on how to prepare and file a patent application. And it explains the intricacies of patents. Most higher education institutions, whether it is engineering colleges, whether it is universities, most of them are required to submit their works of versions of their patents. Moving on, next. Rembrandts in the Attic by Rivet and Klein. This focuses on it. It explores on. It's an exploration of the value and strategic importance of patents in the business world. They discuss how patents can be leveraged to drive innovation, enhance market position, and generate revenue. Next, ma'am. Copyright. And speaking about copyrights, I would emphasize on international copyright principles, law, and practice by Paul Godston and P. Bernd Hugelhose. This is a comprehensive and authoritative guide that navigates the intricate world of international copyright law. And the author's work serves as an essential resource for scholars, practitioners, and policymakers seeking to navigate the complexities of international copyright. The next one is, next slide, please, ma'am. Information Doesn't Want to Be Free, Laws for the Internet Age by Cory Doctorow. In this, Cory delves into the complexities of copyright management and creative freedom in the digital era. It discusses the tension between copyright protection and the democratization of information in an increasingly interconnected world. So that is it from my end, friends. And just to give a kind of, I try to focus on the multidimensional understanding of plagiarism, patents, and copyrights, covering historical context, legal frameworks, ethical considerations, and practical implications. And by delving into this, the information that we have, I'm sure all of you can navigate the intricate landscape of intellectual property, thereby gaining insights into how these concepts shape innovation, creativity, and the dissemination of knowledge in our society. As the fields of intellectual property continue to evolve, these kind of webinars, workshops, or even books serve as valuable resources for scholars, practitioners, and anyone interested in exploring the intersection of law, ethics, and innovation. So that's it from me, friends. And I know that it is kind of a big challenge for me to take up a topic on an afternoon, and that too on speaking about patents, copyright, and plagiarism. It has been quite a challenge for me. The preparation, however, has been quite interesting, because what I discovered is that in the process of preparing my notes, in the process of making my notes on publication ethics, patent, copyright, and plagiarism, what I discovered is that there is so much we from India can do, because we had been cornered, we had been bulldozed, we had been particularly by the colonial era that had dominated our country. And I think 21st century offers us opportunities. We have people from sciences and social sciences. I try to make it more a kind of an awareness on how the nuances related to publication ethics. Thank you so much, ma'am, for making a part.
Thank you, sir.
Wonderful webinar.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. So at the end, I would like to extend my happiness and heartfelt thanks to Professor A. Ramanaga for accepting our request and being a resource person for this 5-day MBA program and enlightening us with his vast knowledge and really a good language. Today I felt like it's a real English faculty. So I really felt very happy, sir, listening to your talk, and I learned a lot of things from your talk today. Thank you so much, sir. And in future also, we will be in touch with you. If any chance, we'll call you again, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, session. Thank you very much. The session is ended here for today. Again, tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock, we'll start. So till then, have a nice day. Bye for us.